Stories in History, Ancient Rome. Page 57, Julius Caesar and His Friend Brutus, by Stephen Feinstein. Calpurnia begged Caesar to stay at home that morning. She had had such a horrible nightmare. She was so shaken that she could hardly talk about it. Yet she finally was able to tell her husband. She had seen blood flowing from a statue of Caesar. Now she was afraid something terrible would happen to Caesar if he went to the Senate. Seeing how upset she was, Caesar was tempted to not go. Then he remembered the old soothsayer, the man who claimed to be able to tell the future. The soothsayer had told him, "Beware of the Ides of March." Today, March 15th, was the Ides of March. Julius Caesar, the powerful ruler of Rome, the most powerful person in the world, was not a superstitious man. And yet, perhaps there was something to all of this. Maybe he should pay attention to this warning. Caesar decided to stay home. Meanwhile, at the Senate, everyone wondered where Caesar was. "It is not like him to arrive late," a senator called Lucius whispered to a friend. "You know how he likes to get right down to work, making all the decisions about almost everything." There was bitterness in Lucius's voice. His friend, a man by the name of Marius, said, "Perhaps he is ill." "Or perhaps he had too much wine to drink last night," said Lucius. "You know, I was a dinner guest at the house of Lepidus last night, and Caesar was there. As I said, the wine was flowing freely. I remember Caesar saying that a sudden death would be the best kind of death." "Why did he say that?" asked Marius. "Well, I don't know. At one point, for some reason, there was a discussion about death," said Lucius. "In any event, since Caesar was made a dictator for life last October, he can do whatever he wants. Perhaps even make himself king of Rome." "Do you remember what happened at the festival in the Forum the other day? Mark Antony approached Caesar and placed a crown on his head." "But the crowds did not cheer," said Marius. "And then Caesar removed the crown, pretending that he didn't want it." "Caesar was just testing the water, so to speak," said Lucius. "But I tell you, Caesar can become king if he chooses. I remember Caesar, the conquering hero, returning from Gaul. He showed off his captive barbarians in chains. The festivities and parades, the chariot races and gladiator fights. It went on for days on end." "The crowds loved him," Marius said. "Caesar won the hearts of plebeians by showering them with bread and circuses." "My friend," said Lucius, "have you seen the new coins bearing Caesar's portrait? I'm afraid Caesar does plan to be king of Rome. And that means the days of the Republic are over for us. You can say goodbye to our privileges. Now our words in government councils will mean little. Romans will no longer elect their rulers." Other senators were saying similar things that morning in private conversations. Some among them seemed to be truly upset and were growing more so by the minute, although they tried to hide it. They had good reason to be nervous. Each one was carrying a dagger under his toga. They planned to plunge these daggers into Julius Caesar when he came into the Senate. The plot had been organized by Cassius. He had carefully chosen only those Romans who had privately spoken of their great hatred for Caesar. Each had his own reasons for being against Caesar. Some felt that Caesar no longer showed them any respect. Others were angry at not being given a higher political rank. All feared a loss of power and importance. Cassius knew he could count on every one of them to carry out the plan. Cassius had not included Mark Antony. He believed Antony was probably too loyal to Caesar. Among the plotters, 60 in all, was Brutus, Cassius's brother-in-law. Cassius needed Brutus if the plan was to succeed. Romans, rich and poor, respected and liked Brutus. They believed him to be a serious statesman and a kind and thoughtful man. If Brutus was with them, the plotter's deed would appear to be a noble act to save the Roman Republic, not a murderer to gain power. When Cassius had first asked Brutus, Brutus had said no. Cassius was not surprised that Brutus didn't want to join the plot. Caesar and Brutus were close friends, although they had once been enemies. Indeed, Caesar had been very good to Cassius as well as to Brutus. 5 years earlier, both Cassius and Brutus had served as officers under Pompey. They had fought against Caesar for control of Rome. Pompey's forces were beaten after a 6-month-long civil war. Yet Caesar had spared the lives of Cassius and Brutus. He believed that pardons often turned former enemies into loyal followers. Pompey, however, had escaped and was later murdered in Egypt. It had taken much convincing before Brutus agreed to join the plot. Time and again, Cassius and the others had begged him, "Think of the Roman Republic above all else." They appealed to him as a statesman to rise above personal feelings. Finally, Brutus saw the killing of Caesar as a necessary and noble act of sacrifice. With Brutus on their side, the plotters were ready to act. "Send someone to Caesar's home," a senator suggested to Cassius, who himself was growing impatient. "Let's find out for certain whether he is ill." Cassius sent another plotter, Decimus, to call on Caesar. Decimus noticed right away that Caesar did not appear to be ill. "Caesar, the Senate awaits your arrival," said Decimus, with a puzzled look toward the worried Calpurnia. Caesar explained that he had decided to stay home to comfort his wife because she had had a bad dream. At this, Decimus said to Caesar, "People will laugh and think you weak if I tell them this. They will gossip behind your back." Decimus kept urging that Caesar go to the Senate immediately to put a stop to any rumors. He managed to change Caesar's mind. As Caesar approached the Senate, a Greek man who had heard about the plot slipped him a note. This Greek was a friend of Brutus, but his first loyalty was to Caesar. He begged Caesar to read the note quickly. Unfortunately, Caesar was distracted by the crowd in front of the Senate and put the note aside. He intended to read it later. Caesar entered the Senate alone. Caesar felt himself safe. He had survived attempts on his life and many close calls on the battlefield. He therefore believed he had no need of guards. Caesar was quickly surrounded by the plotters. Brutus, however, hung back. Even now, having decided that Caesar's death was necessary, Brutus was torn by conflicting emotions. One moment, Caesar was his friend. The next, he was an enemy. Above all, he was the enemy of the Roman Republic. Then, no more time to think. One senator grabbed Caesar's toga and tugged it. This was the signal. Casca struck the first blow, stabbing Caesar in the neck from behind. A look of shock and anger crossed Caesar's face. The others closed in, 23 men slashing and stabbing with their daggers. In vain, Caesar struggled, trying to fend them off, but he was growing weaker. Suddenly, Caesar saw Brutus standing in front of him, dagger in hand, ready to strike. The last ounce of strength went out of him. Looking into his friend's face, Caesar said sadly, "Et te, Brute?" As Brutus thrust the knife into his stomach, the man who would be king fell to the floor. Caesar's bloody body came to rest at the foot of Pompey's statue.